The whole town thought they knew who the monster was. They were wrong. It was the man in the mirror. Everyone feared the silent cowboy. His name was Elijah Cross. To the people of Redemption Ridge, he wasn't a man. He was a specter, a ghost who rode into town 3 months ago, paid cash for a shack on the edge of the desert, and hadn't spoken a word since. The whispers followed him like a shadow. In the barbershop, behind closed doors, the men of the town built his legend with every lie they preferred to believe. The barber whispered, "Killed a man in Abilene, shot him in the back. I heard it from a drummer who saw it with his own eyes." The rancher lowers his voice and says, "Nah, worse than that. He was a bounty hunter, got a taste for blood. Now he just waits, watches. You see them eyes? Empty, like a snake." They whispered rumors to keep him at a distance, because the unknown is far scarier than the truth. But the truth was about to walk right up to his door in a white cotton dress. Fear is often just a story we tell ourselves about people we don't understand. Elijah didn't mind their fear. Fear kept him safe. It kept them away from the pain he carried. While the whole town saw a monster, she saw a man who hadn't been touched by kindness in years, and she decided, right then, to be the one to touch him. Every morning, Ruth swept the church porch. Every morning, the same ghost walked past. But while her father saw a demon, Ruth saw a detail no one else bothered to notice. They weren't the hands of a killer. They were gentle when they touched his horse's mane. They were careful when he tipped his hat, even to people who spat at his feet. And Ruth had been taught that the devil couldn't fake gentleness. The preacher felt the shift before he saw it. His daughter's eyes no longer looked at the town. They looked past it toward the shack on the hill. The preacher says, "That man is trouble. God's creatures have a voice. A man without one has something to hide." It was the town's favorite lie, dressed up as scripture. But Ruth, barely 20 years old, saw through it like glass. Ruth says, "Maybe he's just tired of talking to people who've already made up their minds about him, Pa." That night, Ruth did something no woman in Redemption Ridge had ever done. She baked bread with her own hands, her father's flour, her mother's recipe, a prayer on her lips, waited for the house to fall silent, waited for the moon to rise high enough to light her path, waited for courage to overcome the voices in her head, the town's voices, her father's voice, the voice that said, "A good girl doesn't visit monsters after dark." She wasn't visiting a monster. She was visiting a man who hadn't tasted kindness in 3 years. And kindness doesn't check the time before it knocks. She didn't know it yet, couldn't possibly know, but that loaf of bread was about to do what no preacher, no sheriff, and no town rumor had ever done. It was about to make the silent cowboy remember how to feel. Every morning, before the town woke, Ruth would leave something small, a canteen of fresh water, a piece of bread, a wildflower picked at dawn. She never stayed to watch him take it. She was too afraid he'd bring himself to refuse it. But every morning, by the time the sun cleared the mountains, it was gone. Elijah didn't understand it. Why her? Why him? For years the world had given him only bullets and betrayal. Now this girl, this pure, impossible girl, left him water like he was a man, not a monster. He drank it slowly each morning. Not because he was thirsty, but because it was the only thing he'd tasted in a decade that wasn't poisoned by pain. That night, Ruth found a gift on her side of the fence. A small wooden horse carved by calloused hands in the dark. It was crude, imperfect, but it was the first thing he'd given anyone in years. She pressed it to her heart and looked toward his shack on the hill. Somewhere in the darkness, she knew he was watching too. 2 people, 1 fence, and the first crack in the wall between them. The silence between them was finally speaking. They bet on his silence. They lost more than money. Ruth's father, the preacher, had made it his mission to bring God to the godless. But tonight he wasn't bringing salvation, he was bringing sport. "Preacher, your God can't protect you out here. You know who can? That mute freak you're so scared of." The preacher's face burned with shame. Not because of the mockery, but because part of him knew Silas was right. Out here, in the lawless dust, men like Silas ruled, and men like Elijah, they survived. Later that night, whiskey did what whiskey always does. It turned a coward into a predator. "Let me pass," Ruth said. "Preacher's daughter ought to know better than walking alone. Unless you're looking for a real man." Ruth had walked this path 1,000 times, but tonight, the wolf wasn't in the hills. He was right in front of her, smelling of whiskey and wickedness. She closed her eyes. She prayed. And when she opened them, he was there. He didn't run. He didn't announce himself. One moment the street was empty. The next, Elijah Cross stood between her and hell itself. Silas shouted, "Get out of my way, ghost!" Elijah said nothing. He never did. But his silence spoke volumes. Silas was too drunk to read. "You hear me, mute? I said move." Silas had a gun. Elijah had nothing but his body. It wasn't a fight. It was a test of faith. Elijah's faith in Ruth's safety, against Silas's faith in his own brutality. In less than 3 seconds, Silas was on the ground, unarmed, humiliated, alive, only because Elijah chose mercy. He could have destroyed him, but he didn't. That's when Ruth knew. He wasn't a killer, he was a protector. A quiet night. A campfire on the edge of town. For weeks, Ruth had left gifts on his fence. But tonight she didn't leave anything on the fence. Tonight she crossed it. Ruth brought him coffee. 3 words, but to a man who hadn't shared a moment with anyone in years, they sounded like an invitation back to the land of the living. He couldn't speak. The town thought it was arrogance. Ruth was about to learn the truth. She asked the question no one else dared. Not, "What did you do?" but, "What happened to you?" There's a difference. One judges, the other heals. He pointed to his throat and shook his head. It wasn't that he wouldn't speak, it was that he couldn't. Oh, Elijah! On a battlefield far from home, Elijah Cross had watched his brothers die. He'd screamed for help until his voice shredded like paper in a storm. He screamed until there was nothing left. And when the smoke cleared, the silence remained. For years he wore that silence like armor. But sitting across from Ruth, watching her read his truth in the dirt, the armor began to crack. "You're not a monster, Elijah. You're just a man who loved too hard and lost too much." The whole town feared the silent cowboy. But the preacher's daughter? She held his scars in her hands and called them beautiful. The sanctuary that had once been Ruth's refuge became a courtroom. And the judge was her own blood. The preacher didn't see a daughter standing before him. He saw a rebellion, a stain on his legacy. In his eyes, Elijah wasn't a wounded soldier. He was a disease, and diseases must be cut out before they infect the whole flock. But standing there, in the rainbow light of the stained glass, Ruth realized something her father never taught her. Faith without love is just fear wearing a fancy hat. He spoke words no father should speak. "You are destroying your future, your reputation, my ministry. You cannot fix broken things, Ruth. You can only cut them loose before they drag you down with them." In that moment, Ruth understood the difference between her father's God and the God she believed in. Her father's God required perfection. Her God healed the broken. And Elijah was standing at the door of her heart, wounds and all. She ran. Not away from something, but toward someone, because love had taught her what the church never could. That the messiest, most broken, most silent soul on earth can hold more holiness than 1,000 perfect sermons. The sunlight was running toward the storm, and for the first time, the storm didn't know whether to rage or weep. He was just a man carrying wood. But in that instant, Elijah Cross became something else, a storm. Because the smoke rising in the distance wasn't rising from just any building. It was rising from her. He didn't think. 2 miles in 2 minutes. Boots pounding dirt, heart pounding ribs. The man who hadn't spoken in years had one thought screaming so loud inside his head it deafened him. Not her. Anyone but her. Above him, Ruth. Her white dress glowing against the black smoke like a candle flame fighting the dark. Below him, her father. A man of God, brought to his knees, praying while his daughter burned. But Elijah didn't pray, he climbed. Because some prayers have boots and calloused hands, and a heart that refuses to let go. The fire had surrendered to dawn. Where a home once stood, only smoke and shadow remained. The town gathered in silence, not to judge, not to whisper, but to witness. Two figures emerged from the ashes, clinging to each other like the last survivors of a war no one else saw coming. Ruth was alive, and Elijah Cross had just spoken his first words in 3 years to save her. But evil doesn't surrender quietly. Silas thrashed against the hands that held him, desperate to drag Elijah down with him one last time. His words were poison, aimed to turn the town's fear back toward the man who had just risked everything. "This is your fault," he screamed. "You brought the devil here." And then the silence broke. 3 years of pain, 3 years of solitude, 3 years of being buried alive by trauma, all of it shattered by 6 words. Elijah Cross found his voice not in anger, not in vengeance, but in truth. "No," he said, "the devil was always you." The town didn't just hear a man speak, they heard a soul set free. Dawn broke over Redemption Ridge like a wound finally beginning to heal. The parsonage, Ruth's home, her childhood, her father's legacy, lay in smoldering ruins. But from those ashes, something far more dangerous than fire had emerged, the truth. Silas was gone, dragged away to face justice. The town's whispers had turned from fear of Elijah to shame at their own blindness. But for Ruth, one question remained, burning brighter than any flame. Where does love go when everything you've known turns to dust? Her father's voice cracked, not with anger now, but with the terror of a man about to lose his only child. "Ruth," he begged, "he has his voice back. He can go anywhere, start over anywhere. But you have a place here, a home, a family. Don't throw away everything for a man you barely know." It was the hardest thing Ruth had ever heard, not because it was cruel, but because it was love. Her father wasn't trying to control her. He was terrified. Terrified of losing her, terrified of the unknown, terrified that the daughter he raised in the light would choose to walk into the shadow of a broken man. She chose the storm. But as they walked away together, hand in hand, the storm clouds broke, and the sun shone down on Redemption Ridge for the first time in weeks. Love isn't about finding someone who fits perfectly into your world. It's about finding someone brave enough to build a new one with you, even if the old one has to burn down first. Watch closely. This is how healing spreads. Not in grand gestures, not in sermons from pulpits, but in fence repairs, in nodded hellos, in a man learning that his voice matters even when he chooses silence. Ruth was the first to listen, but she won't be the last.